black CEO walked away from fame, fortune, and fear into the streets where no one bowed, no one cared, hoping to find just one soul who'd love the man, not the myth. At exactly 3:02 a.m., the billionaire most Americans trusted to build their future walked barefoot into the rain, silent, unguarded, forgotten by the very world that once called him a genius. Caleb Hayes, the architect of Silicon Dreams, had everything: power, prestige, a name carved into skyscrapers. But that night, he carried only a gas station coffee and a silence that roared louder than applause. Earlier, a woman had laughed when she believed he had nothing. Not a mistake, a mirror. The city behind him sparkled like a lie. Polished, hollow, indifferent. Cameras saw a mogul, but truth saw a man stripped of faith, asking a question older than gold. Who loves the man when the money vanishes? And so began a descent not into madness, but into clarity. Not to test the world, but to confront it. He vanished from the Forbes lists the next morning. But he wasn't missing. He was finally looking. At 3:02 a.m., the city of New York glowed like a promise it no longer intended to keep. Skyscrapers stood tall in their silence, windows blinking with the cold light of machines that never sleep. But on the rooftop of one of those towers, barefoot and soaked in rain, stood a man who had once been the city's golden child. Caleb Hayes, founder of Millerec, a tech visionary, and the youngest billionaire to ever ring the bell on Wall Street, stood motionless beneath the storm. The rain didn't fall on him. It struck him, like each drop was punishment for forgetting what it meant to be human. In his hand was a flimsy coffee cup from a 24-hour gas station, half empty and lukewarm. He held it like a lifeline, like something real in a world that had become all performance. Below him, the city pulsed with late-night traffic and muted sirens. Somewhere, a television still played a rerun of his last keynote, selling the dream of innovation, freedom, and a better tomorrow. But tonight, no one was watching. And if they were, they wouldn't have recognized this version of him. No designer suit, no entourage, no smile for the cameras, just a man unraveling quietly in the rain. Hours earlier, he'd sat across from someone who once whispered sweet promises in the dark. Tonight, that same woman had leaned back, laughed, and said, "If you didn't have your money, you'd be nobody." He had told her, just for a moment, that he had lost everything. Just to see her reaction, just to see if love lived anywhere beneath the surface. It didn't. She left without finishing her wine. That's when something inside him cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like old wood splitting under pressure. A quiet, internal splintering. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight. He simply paid the check, walked out into the night, and kept walking. Past his security, past the headlines that bore his name, past every artificial light that had once told him he mattered. Now, here he was, on a rooftop, soaking wet, watching his breath fog in the cold as if to prove he still existed. He hadn't spoken in hours. There was no one left to impress, no image left to maintain. The man who once shaped algorithms that predicted human behavior stood defeated by the one variable he never cracked: love that couldn't be bought, coded, or branded. The irony was cruel. Caleb had built systems that understood what people wanted before they did. He sold clarity to the world. Yet here he stood, full of questions no machine could answer. Questions are not about revenue, retention, or quarterly growth. Questions older than commerce. Would anyone stay if he had nothing to offer but silence? Would anyone hold his hand without Googling his net worth? The wind picked up, harsh against his skin. The cup in his hand trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of disappointment. The headlines had always called him brilliant. But brilliance was lonely. And no one tells you that at the top of the mountain, it gets harder to breathe, not because of the altitude, but because there's no one left to talk to. So Caleb made a decision, not out of revenge, not out of ego, but from a quiet desperation buried so deep, even he hadn't felt it in years. He would disappear not from the earth, but from everything tied to his name. No cameras, no titles, no money. Just a man walking back through the fire of obscurity to search for something the world had stolen from him long ago. Truth. And if he didn't find it, Then at least he'd know. At least he'd finally be seen. Long before the rain, long before the test, there was a man the world built in its image, sharp, flawless, untouchable. His name was Caleb Hayes, and for over a decade, he had been not just a name, but a narrative. The face of American progress, of youth-powered capitalism, of the impossible made real by intellect and code. His story had been featured on the covers of Forbes, Wired, and Time, always accompanied by the same tagline beneath, "The future now." I searched. They said he rose from nothing, but that wasn't true. He rose from loneliness, which is far more dangerous. As a child, Caleb didn't speak much. His mother said he watched the world instead, carefully and silently, as if the answers to life were hidden in the details that no one noticed. By 16, he'd built his first AI assistant. By 21, he'd founded a company that would become the backbone of American smart cities. By 32, he had more influence than most elected officials. And yet, through all the standing ovations, all the applause in Silicon Valley boardrooms and Davos stages, one thing never changed: the echo of being surrounded, but unseen. People called him a genius, some called him a machine, but no one called him by his middle name. No one knew he played piano, badly but passionately. No one knew he couldn't sleep without the sound of rain on glass. No one knew he feared silence, not because it was empty, but because in silence he remembered being a boy whose father left without a goodbye. He had become a symbol, but not a man. And when the world invents you, it forgets that you bleed. In a boardroom high above Manhattan, just days before he vanished, Caleb had sat across from 12 of his company's top executives. They didn't speak about innovation. They discussed expansion, domination, and scaling quickly enough to outpace the competition. One executive chuckled, "We're not in the business of helping people. We're in the business of being unavoidable." Caleb didn't smile. He looked around the room and saw reflections of himself, versions of the man he had trained the world to expect. Efficient, hungry, unfeeling, and for the first time in years he felt a sense of shame. He had trained people to value results over reason, image over integrity, speed over soul. And now, in every handshake, he saw transactions. In every conversation, calculations. Even love, somehow, had become a pitch deck, structured, polished, but ultimately hollow. That night, after the board meeting, he attended a charity gala hosted in his name. Flashbulbs popped, influencers posed. Speeches praised him as a visionary philanthropist. But no one noticed he hadn't touched his wine. No one saw the stiffness in his jaw when the mayor called him the American dream in flesh and blood. Because Caleb knew the truth. He was the American lie wrapped in luxury. So when he returned home that evening and stood in the center of his 20,000 square foot penthouse, surrounded by glass walls and curated art, he didn't see success. He saw a cage built from applause, a mausoleum decorated with achievement, and inside it, a man suffocating under a name the world needed him to be. He had lost the plot of his own story. And so, with deliberate hands, he removed the watch that cost more than most homes. He stepped out of his tailored suit. He opened a plain black suitcase, already packed with secondhand jeans, a worn hoodie, and a notebook without a logo. Tomorrow, Caleb Hayes would cease to exist. Only Eli would remain. And this time, no one would clack. But maybe, just maybe, someone would finally care. The diner was quiet, the kind of place where the coffee tastes like burnt hope, and the booths still hold the ghosts of first dates, broken promises, and late-night confessions. It was nothing special: linoleum floors, flickering neon sign, a jukebox that hadn't played a whole song in years, but it was perfect because it was honest. Eli sat by the window, wearing a thrift store hoodie, jeans that sagged at the knees, and sneakers held together more by memory than material. He looked like any man just trying to get through another Tuesday. No cameras, no entourage, just a cheap menu and a chipped mug of black coffee. At exactly 7:03 p.m., the front door opened with a jingle that cut through the quiet like a warning bell. Jessica stepped in, sharp, curated, rehearsed. An Instagram model by trade, or at least by algorithm. She moved like a commercial, every step designed for angles and admiration. She scanned the diner, her lips already curled into something between confusion and disappointment. Her eyes landed on him. "You're Eli?" she asked, not even bothering to hide the disbelief. Eli stood politely, nodded once, and extended his hand. "Thanks for coming," he said, with a calmness that came from knowing how this would end. She didn't take his hand. "Hey, Saturday." He asked how her day was. She answered in half sentences, scrolling her phone between words. Her eyes never lingered on him long enough to see the man behind the disguise. Instead, she glanced at the cracked vinyl seats, the faded menu, and the water stains on the ceiling. "This place is interesting," she muttered, her tone lined with offense disguised as humor. He smiled, almost apologetically. "I like the quiet." She raised an eyebrow. "Right." They talked, or rather, he tried. He spoke of books, of writing, of the joy of building something from nothing. She listened the way people hear when they're just waiting to speak. Eventually she cut in. "So, what do you do?" "I'm a writer," he said. Her laugh was polite, but laced with disbelief. "Like, for money?" "Trying to be," he replied, keeping his voice steady. Jessica blinked, then leaned back in her seat, arms crossed. "You live around here?" "A few blocks away. Nothing fancy, just enough." She didn't even attempt to hide the way her gaze swept over him again. This time, it wasn't confusion. It was confirmation. He wasn't what she came for. Within 10 minutes, she checked her phone, muttered something about a family thing, and stood up. "Thanks for the coffee," she said, even though she hadn't taken a sip. "You seem sweet, just not what I expected." She left a cloud of perfume and judgment in her wake. Eli remained seated, staring through the window at a world that never really looked back. He didn't move for a moment, just sat there, absorbing the silence, the leftover warmth of someone who never intended to stay. From across the street, Marcus watched from the shadow of a bus stop, arms folded. No words were needed. He just shook his head slowly. Eli gave a faint nod in return. Not in surprise, in recognition. This wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't betrayal. It was confirmation again. Confirmation that even in the simplest place, wearing the simplest clothes, with the simplest truths, people still couldn't see past the packaging. As the waitress refilled his coffee, she offered a tired smile. "First date?" He nodded. "Rough one?" He thought for a second, then answered softly. "No, just honest." The jukebox clicked, whined, and played a half song from the 70 seconds that no one had asked for. Outside, the rain had started again. It didn't matter. He'd be back tomorrow. Different woman. Same test. And maybe, just maybe, one day someone would sit across from him and see more than what he wasn't. The elevator opened with a hushed chime, spilling light into the darkened hallway of the penthouse. Caleb, now Eli in the outside world, stepped inside, the weight of the night still clinging to him like smoke. He didn't turn on the lights. The silence didn't ask for company. The suite stretched before him like a museum exhibit, polished, curated, immaculate. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a skyline that millions dreamed of. But tonight, it felt more like a painting behind glass. Beautiful, distant, unreachable. He walked past the grand piano he never touched, the art collection he never truly understood, and the glass sculpture imported from Berlin that no one was allowed to photograph. All of it said success. All of it said status. But none of it told home. The air inside was still, filtered, climate-controlled, yet it felt colder than the rain outside. He hung his hoodie over a $15,000 chair and sat on the floor. Not the couch, not the leather chaise, but the floor. Hardwood, cold, real. He needed something tangible. His back leaned against the marble wall as he stared at the blank ceiling like it might finally answer him. The coffee cup from earlier was still in his hand. He hadn't thrown it away. He didn't want to. Because, for once, it wasn't part of a brand. It wasn't sleek or designed. It was just a cup, from a place that didn't care who he was, and that made it sacred. He looked around. This was the place that had once defined him, the one they all envied. The one investors photographed for magazines, a cathedral built not for prayer, but for praise. There was a room in this penthouse sealed, untouched, where every award he'd ever received was lined up behind glass. TED plaques, Silicon Valley honors, certificates from governments and billion-dollar firms. His name etched in gold, over and over again. But what did it matter if no one ever whispered that name softly? What did it matter if every hug was rehearsed, every smile negotiated? He rose to his feet, slow and heavy, and walked into that room. Inside, the lighting was perfect. Of course it was. It had been designed to reflect glory, but tonight it reflected absence. He walked past his trophies as if they were someone else's legacy, a stranger visiting. He stopped at one, the first award he'd ever received, Most Promising Youth Innovator, age 19. Back then, he had built it because he loved solving problems, because the code sang in his mind like music, not for applause, not for headlines. He touched the glass lightly, then whispered something even the walls might struggle to hear. Where did you go? And then silence, not the kind you fill with noise, but the kind that fills you. Somewhere in the distance, the city buzzed with motion, laughter, and nightlife. But inside this shrine, nothing moved. Even his breath felt out of place. He walked back out to the living room and this time sat at the window, not to admire the view, but to face it, to face the truth that had crept into him, slowly, mercilessly. He had built a kingdom no one wanted to enter unless they could take something from it. He had become a lighthouse for all the wrong ships. And now, for the first time in his life, he didn't want to be seen. He wanted to be known. Tomorrow, he would leave again. But tonight, he would sit in the dark, with nothing but his name echoing in empty rooms. And the quiet, brutal knowing that legacy means nothing if no one ever loved the man who left it behind. The sun had not yet risen, but the penthouse had already begun to glow, not from natural light, but from the cold hum of recessed ceiling panels, precise, clinical, as if warmth were optional. Caleb stood in his study, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with titles no one had touched. His reflection shimmered faintly in the black mirror of a powered-off monitor. He looked like a ghost in his own home. The desk before him was perfectly arranged, a Mont Blanc pen beside an untouched legal pad, a silent phone docked on its charger. A watch worth more than a nurse's annual salary sat beside a glass of pristine water. Everything was in place. Everything except him. He slid open the bottom drawer. Inside, a simple black backpack already packed, folded jeans with frayed seams, a thrift store hoodie, soft from years of wear, old sneakers, the soles worn almost flat, and at the very bottom, an unbranded spiral notebook with a single line scribbled on the first page. No identity, no advantages, just the truth. He zipped it closed. The door opened without a knock. Marcus stood in the threshold, loyal, sharp, his eyes trained for details, not emotion. He looked at Caleb the way a man looks at an avalanche and wonders if it can be reasoned with. "You're sure?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Caleb replied. "Start wiping the trail. You want me to deactivate your socials, reroute your accounts, and pause public appearances?" "All of it," Caleb said. "Scrub my name without deleting it. Let them wonder, not confirm." Marcus hesitated just for a breath. "This will cost you goodwill and control." Caleb turned, his voice lower. "Control is the problem, Marcus. It's made me invisible." They stood in silence. Then Marcus reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside it, an ID with the name Eli Warren, a prepaid phone, and a transit card with just enough funds to ride unnoticed. "You'll be poor to everyone but me," Marcus said. "You'll disappear, but I'll keep watch." Caleb gave a slight nod, not of gratitude, but of necessity. There was no room for thank yous in what he was about to do. This wasn't a gesture. It was surgery removing everything that insulated him from the world. "Start lining up the dates," Caleb said. "One a day, no photos, no filters, just women who say they want something real." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What's the pitch?" "Tell them he's lost everything. A man rebuilding from nothing. See who shows up." "And what are you looking for?" Marcus asked, more softly now. Caleb turned to the window. The skyline was beginning to blush with the earliest touch of dawn, but even in all that light, the city still looked distant, disinterested. "I'm looking for someone," he said, "who doesn't flinch when I have nothing to offer. Someone who doesn't ask what I can build, but who I am when it all falls apart." He paused, then added, "If that person exists, I want to find her outside this world, outside my name." Marcus nodded once. "And if no one shows up?" Caleb smiled faintly. "Not sad, not bitter, just real. Then at least I'll know." He grabbed the backpack and slung it over his shoulder, walked past glass sculptures and award plaques down the private elevator past his reflection one last time. This wasn't an exit. It was an unbranding. Tomorrow, the media will ask where he went, but they wouldn't find him, because Caleb Hayes was no longer the question. Now, the answer would belong to Eli. The morning sky hadn't yet made up its mind. A pale gray hung low over the city, thick with the scent of rain and unrest, while Manhattan stretched awake with the usual groan of delivery trucks and half-hearted sunrise. A quiet transformation was already in motion, not on the news, not in boardrooms, but on a side street few would ever bother to glance down. A side door opened at the base of the Hayes Tech Tower, unmarked, unsupervised, no valet, no reporters, no glass doors swinging open to the click of designer shoes, just a shadow stepping into the day. Eli Warren, formerly known to the world as Caleb Hayes, walked out, unrecognizable. The tailored suits were gone. So was the car service. In their place, a faded canvas backpack, second-hand jeans with a cigarette burn near the pocket, and a jacket bought for warmth, not appearance. His beard had begun to grow in unevenly. The lines on his face, once hidden under grooming and glare, were now honest. As he walked, no one turned, no one whispered, and for the first time in years, he didn't have to smile. The subway platform was already crowded. Commuters buried their faces in cracked phones and bitter coffee. No one noticed the billionaire among them, not because he was hiding well, but because he'd finally become forgettable. A mother pulled her child closer. A teenager bumped his shoulder without apology. A busker played out of tune. Eli stood there, holding a transit card with just enough value to get him downtown. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had funded half the city's digital infrastructure. Now he stood among the people who never knew his name but used his systems every day. He took the downtown line. No fanfare, no luxury, just the screech of steel against steel, and the warm press of strangers who didn't care who he used to be. When he stepped onto the street again, the air smelled different, grittier, truer. Brooklyn didn't pretend to be perfect. Paint peeled, neon flickered, pigeons outnumbered people in some corners. But here, life wasn't curated, it was lived. He walked 3 blocks, turned down an alley, so narrow the buildings leaned into each other like conspirators. At the end of it stood a 3-story brick walk-up, the kind of place with broken doorbells and neighbors who don't ask questions. He pulled out a minor brass key that Marcus had given him. It stuck a little in the lock good. That meant it hadn't been replaced with a digital one. The apartment was small, barely lit, and smelled faintly of mildew and yesterday's rain. 1 window, 1 mattress, 1 sink that dripped every 7 seconds like a metronome counting down a new life. He dropped his backpack on the floor and sat on the mattress. No sheets, no art, no staff, just air and truth. He didn't speak. There was no one to impress, no point to make. And yet, something inside him shifted. Not joy, not peace, but space. Space for something to begin again. From the corner of the room, he heard the soft buzz of the prepaid phone Marcus had given him. A message lit the screen. First date scheduled. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Street diner. Her name's Jessica. Eli read the message and placed the phone face down on the table. Outside, a siren wailed past without stopping. No one knew Caleb Hayes had left the building. But Eli Warren had arrived, and the city didn't even blink. The diner was the kind of place that hadn't changed its wallpaper since the Reagan administration. A narrow counter ran the length of the room, behind which a tired man in a grease-stained apron poured burnt coffee like it was a holy ritual. Fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. The booths were cracked leather, patched and repatched with tape that no longer matched. This was where stories didn't start, but where they ended quietly. Eli Warren sat alone in the corner booth. He'd chosen it because it was near a window, not for the view, but for the reflection, so he could see himself without really looking. He wore a plain gray hoodie, one that sagged at the elbows. His fingers were rough from carrying boxes at the warehouse gig Marcus had quietly arranged. His eyes, once bright under stage lights and camera flashes, now took the weight of waiting. 7:03 p.m. The door creaked open. She entered like she owned something, maybe not the diner, but indeed the space around her. Jessica, high heels stabbing the linoleum, hair perfectly curled, lips painted with precision. She glanced around, then saw him. Her expression faltered. "You're Eli?" she asked, voice clipped. He stood, polite, steady. "Yes, thanks for coming." She sat down across from him without offering her hand. Her eyes scanned the room as if it offended her. "I didn't think it'd be this casual." He smiled gently. "I like places where the menu doesn't lie." Jessica gave a short laugh. Not warm, not unkind, just guarded. "Right." A waitress came over and poured water for us. Jessica barely looked up. Eli ordered coffee, black. Jessica hesitated, then asked, "Do you have almond milk?" The waitress shook her head. Jessica sighed. Eli leaned in slightly. "So, what do you do?" "I'm in fashion," she said quickly. "Modeling, content creation, and some brand work. Mostly digital now. You?" "I'm a writer," he said calmly. Her eyes flicked to his hoodie. "Oh, like for a blog or something?" "Mostly fiction. Trying to get published. It's been slow." She stirred her water absently. "So, what's your story? You start over or something?" He nodded. "Yeah. Life hit a wall. Trying to rebuild from the ground up." Jessica didn't ask what the wall was. She just nodded, the way someone nods when they've already lost interest. She glanced down at her phone and tapped the screen. "Sorry, just a lot going on today. My agent's texting about a campaign." Eli smiled again, gently. "Of course, I won't keep you." She looked up, clearly weighing the pros and cons of staying. "You're sweet, but I guess I just pictured something different." "What kind of different?" he asked, not accusatory, just curious. Jessica shrugged. "You know, ambition, drive. I've dated guys who lost everything before, and it's never just about the money, it's the mindset. If you're still figuring things out, I guess I'm not in that phase of life." Eli nodded once. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. She stood. "Anyway, thank you. This place isn't my vibe, but good luck with your books." And just like that, she was gone. He watched her walk out, heels echoing through the quiet diner like punctuation marks. He didn't move. The waitress came by again. "Refill?" she asked. He nodded. "Please." Outside, the street was lit by tired neon and the occasional passing car. Across the road, Marcus stood at a bus stop, arms folded, blending into the shadows like a bodyguard watching a ghost. Eli sat in silence, staring at the table where her water glass still sweated onto the formica. The test had begun, and its first result was exactly what he feared. She saw nothing because he had nothing to show. The second date came quietly, like a business meeting rather than a chance at connection. This time, the woman was Clarissa, a 28-year-old MBA student from the Upper West Side, dressed with precision and walking with purpose. She stepped into the modest diner, glanced once around the room, and almost instinctively wrinkled her nose at the lack of wine glasses and white linen. But still, she came. Eli stood to greet her, offering a polite smile. "Hi, thanks for making it." "Of course," she replied, sitting down immediately. "Though I'll admit, I wasn't expecting this type of place." "It's where I go when I want to hear myself think," he said. Clarissa opened the menu with mild disapproval. "Do they have anything gluten-free?" They ordered. She chose a salad she barely touched. Eli kept it simple with a coffee and a side of toast. As the meal began, the conversation followed a cold, calculated rhythm. "So," she asked, You said you're starting over. Yes, Eli replied, calm and sincere. The last few years were a reset button. I left the career I had, gave up the lifestyle, and I'm rebuilding slowly. She nodded. And now I'm writing part-time jobs for income. No car, small apartment in Brooklyn. Clarissa didn't flinch, but her eyes sharpened. Do you have a plan, a timeline, anything set in stone? No timeline, he answered honestly. I'm figuring it out, on purpose. Her fingers tapped the edge of her glass. I get it. We all want meaning, but I also believe in structure. I'm not in my 20s just to take chances on someone's uncertainty. Eli leaned back slightly. That's fair. So what are you looking for? Stability, she answered without hesitation. Someone with a clear future, financial clarity, a direction. Love, sure, but love that doesn't drown. There it was again, the unwritten contract of modern dating. Love was welcome, but only if it came with a credit history and a career trajectory. The bill arrived. Eli reached for it. Clarissa didn't argue. They stepped outside together. The sidewalk was still wet from the afternoon rain. Clarissa checked her phone before looking up. You seem kind and honest. However, I've worked hard to achieve my current position. I can't build someone else's ladder while climbing mine. Eli didn't try to change her mind. He simply nodded. Thank you for your time. Clarissa smiled faintly. You'll find someone, but maybe someone less, focused on starting over. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement as she disappeared into the crowd. Eli stayed there for a moment, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. He wasn't surprised, but he did feel something, not rejection, but confirmation. That night, back in his apartment, he sat by the window, notebook on his lap. He didn't write. He just stared at the page. 2 women. 2 conversations, and in both the same silent truth. People said they wanted authenticity, but what they wanted was a partner with a resume. Love, it seemed, wasn't priceless after all. It just came with terms and conditions. It was the 3rd night, and the air felt heavier, like the city itself was bracing for something. Eli sat on a bench outside a dimly lit food truck known only to locals. Steam curled from the vendor's grill into the cold evening, blending with the ghost of memory and 1,000 unanswered questions that trailed behind his breath. Her name was Esme. She arrived wearing a navy coat and a look that held both poise and practiced softness. Her voice, when she greeted him, had warmth, the kind that made you feel seen before you even spoke. She ordered 2 cups of hot cocoa without asking his preference. You look like you need something sweet, she smiled. Eli nodded, grateful for the gesture. They found a quiet bench nearby, just out of reach of the neon glare but close enough to the rhythm of life. The shuffle of shoes, the laughter from a nearby bar, the echo of car horns a few blocks away. It felt like a slice of realness in a city that rarely offered any. Esme was different, or at least she seemed to be. She didn't glance at her phone. She didn't fidget. She asked questions not to interrogate, but to gain a deeper understanding of the subject. What are you reading lately? What did you dream of before the world told you to be practical? The way she listened felt almost sacred. For the first time in days, Eli laughed, not performatively, not politely, but from somewhere he thought had been locked away. He told her about his childhood summers, about writing bad poetry in high school, and about getting lost in science fiction worlds where people were judged by their courage, not their wealth. Esme listened like someone who wasn't in a rush to reply. I believe in second chances, she said, her hands wrapped around the cocoa like it was the last warm thing on earth. People mess up, life unravels, but the heart, that's what you follow. By the end of the night, Eli felt something dangerously close to hope. When they parted, she touched his sleeve lightly. Text me if you'd like to walk again, she said. I don't care about where you live. I care about how you live. He watched her disappear into the blur of city shadows, her presence lingering like the tail end of a melody that refused to fade. For the first time, he didn't walk away with silence in his chest. He walked home with possibility. But hope, like most beautiful things, can be fragile. The next morning, his prepaid phone buzzed a soft frustration across his windowsill. Esme. Hey, love, I hate asking, but my rent's overdue. I'm really in a bind. Could you help? I believe in us. Eli stared at the message, unmoving. A second buzz followed, this time with a heart emoji. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. He placed the phone screen down, got up from the mattress, and walked to the window. Outside, Brooklyn looked exactly as it had the day before, but something inside him had cracked. She had said all the right things and done everything right, but in the end her heart had a price too. That night, Eli didn't eat, he didn't write, he didn't sleep. Instead, he whispered into the room with no one to hear. How many lies have been rehearsed just to catch someone trying to love? And the silence answered, more than you think, but maybe not always. The apartment was darker than usual. A storm had rolled in without warning, soaking the city in thick sheets of rain. The leaky window above Eli's mattress dripped steadily, tapping the floor like a metronome, counting the seconds of another wasted day. His coat, soaked from his walk back, hung limply on a chair. His notebook lay open, blank. The pen beside it had long since run out of ink. He hadn't spoken to anyone since Esme. The silence now wasn't peaceful, it was pointed. It mocked him. 3 women, each representing a different kind of disappointment. One judged him for where he ate. One audited him like a business loan. One whispered dreams while asking for rent money. And each time, he had hoped. He had offered honesty like it meant something. Now, he wasn't sure it did. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, elbows on his knees. Rain splattered against the glass like impatient fingers. For a man who once stood on keynote stages before tens of thousands, who commanded billion-dollar rooms with a single nod, it was strange how loud an empty room could feel. The phone buzzed. Not Esme, not Marcus, just a weather alert. He didn't move. Then, almost reluctantly, he picked up the phone and scrolled to one name, Marissa, his assistant, his longest-serving ally, the only person who had seen both the empire and the unraveling. He called. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was calm, unsurprised. I was wondering when you'd check in. I'm done, he said quietly. A pause. No gasp, no pity, just silence. Then, talk to me. He exhaled. I thought I could find someone who saw the man, not the myth. I thought if I stripped everything away, I'd find something pure. But it's just empty. I'm tired, Marissa. I know, she said. I can hear it. He waited for her to offer sympathy, strategy, or solutions. She didn't. Instead, she said, you remember what I told you about my husband? You met when you had nothing. Exactly. He met me when I had 2 jobs and a broken radiator in my car. I brought soup in a Tupperware to our first date. We couldn't afford wine, so we split a Snapple. And he still says it was the best meal of his life. Caleb closed his eyes. How did you know he was real? Because he never asked what I used to be, only what I wanted to become. Another pause. The rain softened outside, as if it were listening too. There are still people like that, Marissa continued. But they're not loud. They're not dressed up for Instagram. They're helping someone carry groceries while the world scrolls past. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. I'm not sure I have anything left to test. Then stop testing, she said gently. Start being. Let it hurt. Let it get quiet. And when someone shows up in that quiet, you'll know. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he whispered, what if no one ever does? Then at least you'll know you did. You became the man who stopped pretending. He hung up slowly, placing the phone beside the dry notebook. The leak above had slowed. Outside, a siren passed and faded into the distance. Eli didn't pack. He didn't move. He just sat there, not defeated, but human. And for the first time in this entire experiment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of it all, not as punishment, but as truth. Because sometimes, before the miracle arrives, all you get is the waiting. The 5th night came quietly, without thunder or warning, just the hush of rain misting over the streets like breath over glass. Brooklyn, soaked and flickering under tired street lamps, pulsed with the kind of silence that only comes after disappointment has settled into your bones. Eli sat beneath the rusted awning of a closed tailoring shop. The neon sign above had one letter out. The bench was warped. His hoodie was damp. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and his eyes were half closed. He hadn't eaten since yesterday, not out of drama but disinterest. When hope fades, so does appetite. The city walked past him. Some glanced, most didn't. One man tossed a crumpled dollar into the puddle near his foot. A woman with designer heels took a selfie 2 feet away and hashtagged it humble moment. Then she vanished into a cab. He said nothing, not even to himself. Then, the click of soft footsteps. A woman approached, her head covered by a faded scarf knotted at the base of her neck. She carried a nylon bag and an umbrella bent at one rib. She moved without hesitation, as though she had seen him before. But she hadn't. Not really. Not Eli. Not Caleb. Just a man sitting alone in the rain. "You'll get sick like this," she said, voice low and unhurried. He didn't look up. She knelt slightly, set down the umbrella, and pulled a plastic container from her bag. "It's rice and beans. I made too much." He turned his head slowly, surprised. "You don't even know me." She smiled gently. No one should eat alone, especially not in the rain. He took the container, hands trembling slightly, not from hunger, but from the unfamiliarity of the unconditional. "I'm Camila," she added. "I teach kindergarten, and I sew." "Eli," he said, just trying to get by. She didn't ask where he came from, didn't ask about work, background, or ambition. Instead, she reached behind her, unwrapped the scarf from her head, and gently placed it over his shoulders. It smelled like lavender and detergent, like warmth. "There," she said. "Now you're not invisible." They sat there together, in silence. No demands, no timeline. Just shared space in the middle of a city that rarely paused long enough to notice anyone falling. When the rain lightened, she stood and nodded toward the storefront behind them. "My shop's small, but it's dry," she said. "You can sit while I close up." He followed her in. The space smelled of fabric and old wood. A sewing machine rested beneath a crooked lamp. A rack of children's clothes hung beside a table with papers and glue sticks, a world she had built quietly. She handed him a mug of hot water, not tea, just water, and said nothing else. No story, no pity, just presence. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel studied or dismissed. He felt seen. That night, as he left her shop with the scarf still around his shoulders and the rice container empty in his bag, Eli looked up at the sky. The clouds had parted slightly, just enough to reveal a sliver of moon. And in that moment, Caleb Hayes, the billionaire disguised as a nobody, didn't feel rescued. He didn't feel chosen. He felt something far rarer. He felt possible. And possibility, he realized, was all hope ever needed to begin. The morning after the rain was different. Not in the sky, it remained overcast, but in Eli's chest. The silence in his apartment didn't feel heavy. It felt paused, like a breath held before a word of truth. The scarf Camila had given him lay folded beside the mattress. Her scent, lavender, faint citrus, still lingered on the threads. He picked it up and held it, not for warmth, but for memory. At noon, he returned, not because of hunger, but because something in her presence had fed him in a way no luxury ever had. The tailoring shop was open, the bell above the door chiming a soft note as he entered. Camila looked up from her machine, eyes lighting up without surprise. "I figured you'd come back." "I wasn't sure I would," he replied. "But you did," she said, standing. "Good." She handed him a broom and pointed toward the corner. "If you're staying, you're helping." So he swept. He folded. He rearranged spools of thread and white dusty shelves. She didn't ask for stories, and he didn't offer them. The shop was filled with music, old Spanish ballads playing from a cracked radio, and the soft, rhythmic hum of her sewing. He found peace in her movements, her concentration, the way her fingers danced with cloth and thread, turning scraps into shape. She didn't perform. She simply was. At lunch, they shared a sandwich that was cut unevenly. He took the smaller half without being asked. She smiled at that. No comment, just noticed. They talked. Nothing big, nothing curated, She told him about her students, how one had drawn a superhero with a sewing machine for a cape. He laughed genuinely, and she seemed pleased by it, though she didn't say so. That evening, as he helped her close the shutters, she turned to him. "You don't talk much about your past." "There's not much to say," he answered. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. "You're welcome here anyway. Just don't lie." "I haven't." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we're okay." He stepped out into the street, colder now as night crept in. He turned to leave, but paused. "Camila," he said, voice low. She looked up from the lock she was twisting shut. "I don't know what this is," he continued, "but thank you for not asking me to be more than I am." She smiled, small, quiet, honest. "You helped me carry fabric. You fed the neighbor's cat when I forgot. You didn't laugh when I burned the soup yesterday. You are already more than most." That hit him deeper than any compliment ever had. "See you tomorrow?" she asked. "If you'll have me." "I already do." He turned and walked back into the Brooklyn dusk, passing windows glowing with other people's lives. He didn't envy them. Not tonight. That night, back in his apartment, he didn't lie on the mattress. He sat by the window instead, notebook in his lap, pen finally working. He wrote, "Some people find love in penthouses. Some find it in silence. I think I'm learning to find it where no one's looking." Outside, the city moved without noticing him. But somewhere, behind a shuttered shop door, someone had. And for a man who had once owned the world but not a place to return to, Camila had given him exactly that. A place, a rhythm, a reason. The shop was closed for the day. Rain tapped lightly on the windows, this time a friend instead of a warning. Inside, the hum of the sewing machine had gone still. The spools were tucked away. The iron cooled. Camila sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting buttons into tiny glass jars, humming a lullaby from her childhood. Eli Caleb watched her from the doorway of the back room, hands in his pockets, heart louder than the thunder outside. He had come here every day for 2 weeks now, fixed shelves, carried fabric, brewed tea, laughed more than he had in years. And somewhere in the quiet folding of linens and the laughter between stitches, he had fallen for her, not the way tabloids describe love, but the way a tree leans toward the sun without even realizing it. But the truth was a storm that couldn't be outrun forever. She looked up and smiled. "You're early today." "I didn't sleep," he said. "Something on your mind." He took a step closer, then another, then sat down beside her, knees nearly touching. He held something in his hand, a folded piece of paper creased from nervous fingers. "I haven't been honest with you," he began. She didn't move, didn't blink. "Just listen. My name isn't Eli. It's Caleb. Caleb Hayes." A pause. Not silence. Not shocking. Just a long breath between them. She tilted her head slightly. "The tech guy? The billionaire?" "Yes." Camila looked away, not with fear or anger, but calculation, thought, a seamstress measuring invisible lines. And the poor writer with calloused hands and no plan. "That was still me," he said quickly. "I didn't fake the man, I hid the label." She stayed quiet. He unfolded the paper and placed it gently on the floor between them. It was a check, $5 million. "To the woman who helped me with no camera, no request, no expectation," it read. "I carried this every day," he said, "to see if anyone, wanted the money instead of the man." She finished for him. Yes. Her fingers brushed the paper once. Then she pushed it gently back toward him. "You didn't need to buy your answer," she said softly. "You just had to listen to what I didn't ask for." He studied her face. "Are you angry?" "No," she said. "I'm tired. Tired of people thinking trust is something you test like software." He looked down. "I get it," she continued. "You've been used, lied to. So, you started hiding the truth, as if it were some delicate jewel. But love isn't a trap or a reward. It's a place. You either stand in it, or you don't." The rain grew stronger outside. A gust of wind rattled the window. Neither of them moved. "I wanted to tell you," he said quietly. "I just didn't want to lose this. Lose you." Camila's voice softened further. Then don't. He looked up. But from now on, she added, no disguises, no crumbs of truth. Either give it all, or go. He nodded. I'll give you everything. Everything I was, everything I am. She reached for his hand, held it without hesitation. Good, she whispered, because I never needed a millionaire. She looked down at their joined hands. I just needed a man who showed up every day. And stayed. And in that tiny tailor shop, beneath a leaking roof and the weight of all they hadn't said, the truth at last had no cost. Only consequence. And commitment. The room was small, but the laughter inside was big. Camila's mother had just turned 50, and their modest family home was overflowing with handmade decorations, loud salsa music from a cracked Bluetooth speaker, and the smell of rice, roast pork, and sweet plantains wafting from the kitchen. Children ran between their legs. Aunties gossiped in fast Spanish. A cousin attempted to DJ from a laptop with missing keys. Caleb stood near the door, stiff in a second-hand blazer that was too short in the sleeves. He'd ironed it himself. Camila had grinned when she saw him earlier that day and whispered, "Perfect. You look broke and in love." "Pretend to be my fiancé," she'd asked. "Just for the day. It'll keep the noise down." He had agreed without pause. But now, as her relatives sized him up, the noise only seemed to grow. They whispered behind coffee cups. Where'd she find him? He didn't even bring wine. He's polite, but there's something off. Camila stood beside him proudly, never flinching. When her ex-boyfriend Elias walked in, he made sure his gold chain caught the light. He walked straight up to Caleb with the smug air of a man who had been told too often that he was a catch. "So this is the new guy?" Elias smirked, holding out a limp hand. "What do you do?" "I write," Caleb replied. "For a living." Another cousin chimed in. "He's figuring things out." Camila cut in, her voice steady. Elias leaned closer. "Hope you're not just here for a warm meal, my man. Camila deserves more than borrowed suits and bedtime stories." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later, as the sun dipped and laughter faded into soft music, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside. A uniformed courier stepped into the yard carrying a small velvet box and a set of car keys. He approached Camila's mother and handed them over. "For you," he said. "A gift." The family circled quickly. Gasps, questions. Who had done this? Elias stepped forward with a grin. "It's from me," he lied. Camila and I stayed close. I wanted her mom to have something nice. The box opened to reveal diamond earrings. The car, a brand new hybrid sedan. Camila's mother teared up. The crowd applauded. Elias basked in it. Caleb stood in the back, saying nothing, watching. But Camila noticed. She slipped through the group and found his hand. "Why aren't you saying anything?" "Because this isn't about me," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "You did this, didn't you?" "I just wanted her to feel seen. Just once." Camila exhaled. "You let another man take the credit." "I didn't come to claim anything," he said. "I came for you." The words settled between them. Just then, someone tapped a spoon on a glass. A toast was beginning. Voices hushed. Faces turned. And from the back of the room, Camila's sister, Marta, a bank manager, stood and smiled tightly. "I still think Camila's making a mistake," she said to the crowd, holding her wine. "Love is sweet, yes, but a woman needs security, stability, not dreams and borrowed jackets." The room chuckled. A few nodded. Camila opened her mouth to respond, then stopped, because Caleb stepped forward, straightened his too-short blazer, cleared his throat, and said, "My name is Caleb Hayes, CEO of Hayes Tech." The silence that followed could have swallowed the city. Eyes widened. Forks froze midair. Someone dropped their drink. He turned to Camila, then knelt slowly, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket. "You loved me when I had nothing," he said. "Now I give you everything." Tears welled in her eyes, not from shock, but from recognition. And in the stillness of that small living room, a simple whisper cut through the noise. Yes, the headlines exploded the next morning. Tech billionaire goes undercover to find real love. Caleb Hayes and the seamstress who stole a titan's heart. Media vans circled the block. Bloggers guessed at the details. Influencers copied Camila's scarf style. Investors called nonstop, half for business, half for gossip. The world finally knew the truth. But inside a quiet apartment in Brooklyn, none of that mattered. Caleb and Camila sat at the small table near the window, sharing toast and coffee. No photographers, no speeches, no applause. Just then, he had offered her private jets. She said she preferred the subway, at least it came with real people and unexpected conversations. He offered her a luxury wedding in Tuscany. She asked for one in her mother's backyard. He provided her staff. She wanted mornings alone, folding laundry in silence. She didn't ask for more, and that, to Caleb, was the miracle. Later that week, his parents came to meet her. His mother, once hesitant, watched Camila volunteering at a small neighborhood clinic, handing out diapers and formula to young mothers. She didn't speak. She didn't interrupt. She just watched, then wept. That evening, she hugged her son tightly. "You finally found someone who sees you and still stays." Caleb nodded. "I found someone who never looked for a crown." The wedding was simple, but the meaning behind it thundered louder than any orchestra ever could. Camila wore a dress she stitched herself, lace sewn from pieces of her grandmother's veil. Caleb wore no tie, just a smile that hadn't left since the morning he saw her under the overhang, holding rice and beans. They didn't exchange vows written by someone else. They spoke the truths they lived. "You fed me when I had nothing," Caleb said. "Now I promise to feed your spirit every day I breathe." Camila replied, tears in her eyes. "You were enough even when the world thought you weren't." People wept, not because it was grand, but because it was real. Not one guest remembered the floral arrangements, but they remembered the silence that followed her words. A silence that said, "This is what love looks like when no one's pretending." Years passed. Caleb never returned to the man he was. Not completely. His suits remained in the closets. His luxury cars gathered dust. Instead, he rebuilt his company from a smaller office, filled with second chances and fewer mirrors. The world still referred to him as a mogul. But he only ever called himself Camila's husband. They had a daughter. Her name was Alma's soul, because that's what Camila had found in him, and what he had finally discovered in himself. And when Alma asked, years later, "Daddy, how did you meet Mommy?" he didn't tell her about the disguise or the diner or the fake name. He simply said, "I met her when I stopped being afraid to be seen." Because in the end, Caleb Hayes, once a man surrounded by wealth, cameras, and applause, learned the most valuable truth of all. The richest life begins the moment you are loved, not for what you carry, but for what you lay down. And sometimes, the most excellent fortune isn't found in gold or glass towers, but in a plastic container of rice and beans, offered in the rain. A man stripped of every privilege stands in the rain and is fed from a plastic container. That is where the story begins, and where it asks each of us a question we can't ignore. In a world that applauds the loudest wallet, what is the value of a quiet heart? Caleb Hayes discovered that the only wealth worth keeping is the courage to be utterly seen, and the only proof of love is the hand that stays when the lights go out. Remember this image, a billionaire, his knees bent on cracked linoleum, offering everything to the woman who once offered him rice and beans. If that picture lingers behind your eyes tomorrow, the story has done its work. Now the job is yours. Who do you become when no one can reward you? Who do you choose when there is nothing to gain? Tell us right here, right now in the comments. Share this video with someone racing after the wrong treasure. And if you believe the world needs more tales that bruise the surface and reach the soul, subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the following videos.